Hello, thank you all for joining us on this last session of the day. I know it's one people have been looking forward to. Welcome to Searching for Ann Walker. For those of you who have been with us at the summit this weekend or attended before, you'll know that something we really value is the spirit of collaboration. And that ranges from the various projects that are going on in this community, from the Enlister Transcription Project to some of the independent research that's being done that people are embarking on together. And in this session, we really wanted to highlight another shining example of that with some of the contributors of In Search of Ann Walker, who are doing incredible work in sharing Ann Walker's story and uncovering more about her life. They have a lot to share with you, and I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Diane to tell you a little bit more about the group and what they're up to.
Hello, I'm Diane Halford. I'm the co-founder of In Search of Ann Walker. In Search of Ann Walker is a research collaborative, and our aim is to find as much of Anne's story as we possibly can. And we want to ensure that she's no longer a footnote in history, that she has her equal place. Okay, so In Search of Ann Walker was set up by Steve Crabtree, Alexa Tansley and I, after Steve and I did a talk with Pat Esgate about our research of Ann Walker post 1840 for Ann Lister Birthday Weekend Live way back in May 2020. It seems a long time ago now. It got closer to the date, and after the talk, we realised we needed somewhere to put our research. So we set up a website and a Twitter, and eventually expanded to a Facebook and an Instagram to post snippets and blogs and on all the kind of things that we were finding as we got further and further into our research. And then we soon realised there were lots of other people that wanted to help, lots of other people who were interested in the story of Ann Walker. And shortly after, we launched our first big project, and that was called Ann Walker in the Diaries, not the misspelling that I called it in Ann Walker in the Dairies at one point. No, she wasn't in a dairy, she was in a diary. And this is the finding references to Ann Walker in Ann Lister's diary, and we had over 30 people get involved in that, and Louise will be talking about that a little bit later on. The other things that have been going on, we've got our diary comparison project going on. It's just about 4 days off the year anniversary of finding Ann Walker's diary in the Rawson archive in the West Yorkshire archive, and we transcribed that. And Doriana will be talking about finding the transcription of the diary, and the diary comparison project, which we call Comparing the Anns, where we're doing daily postings of both diaries. Doriana will speak about that later. We've also got Anne's associate research, which Deb will be talking about, where we're researching all of Anne's people related to her in some way, whether that be through friendship or professional or family. We're doing a fair amount of accounts, diaries and will transcriptions in order to try and find little snippets related to Ann Walker. We've transcribed Anne's letters to Elizabeth, and Lila will be talking about that. We've got ongoing archive research, the research blog part of our website, and also an important part is Anne's legacy and the fundraising we're doing as part of that. So without further ado, I will ask Doriana just to start talking about some of the things that we've been doing here in Search of Ann Walker the past year. Doriana.
Thanks, Anne. Hello, everyone. My name is Doriana Shro, and I will say a few words about our diary comparison project and about transcribing Ann Walker's journal itself. Given that we have diaries from both Ann Walker and Ann Lister for a certain short period of time, it seemed like a most obvious thing to do would be to compare the daily entries, and this is exactly what we started doing. Ann Walker started writing her journal on the 4th of June, 1834. So on June the 4th this year, we put up our first comparison page, side-by-side transcriptions of Ann Walker's journal and of Ann Lister's diary. And we've been doing that every day, day by day, just going by the actual dates in 1834. Anne Walker wrote her journal throughout their honeymoon up until the end of August, when, for unknown reasons, she stopped, and then resumed writing her journal in November. And again, intermittently wrote it through February 1835, 19th of February 1835. At which point she stopped, because probably she simply ran out of space, because the last entry is right on the inside cover of inside back cover of her notebook. So she simply ran out of notebook, and we presume that she continued writing somewhere else. In fact, we do know that she, in the years that followed, she wrote more of her journal, because Anne Lister mentions her writing her journal at various points during those years. Now, obviously, their journals have different styles, structures, perspectives, even approaches to journaling itself, because obviously Anne Lister's journal was written by someone who, by that point, had been journaling excessively for the past several decades. Whereas we are not sure whether Anne Walker ever wrote a journal before she started on this one. It's impossible to say at this stage. One of the most obvious differences is that Anne Walker doesn't use any code, so there are no spicy bits, which obviously she should not have been able to write in plainhand. However, there is a little k in one entry that we are fairly sure is probably an abbreviation for a kiss, because it tallies with a kiss that Anne Lister mentions in the same day's entry. So there's that k, a bit of a code. As you would expect, Anne Walker's entries tend to be rather shorter than Anne Lister's. Anne Lister has a tendency of going on and on and on and on about a variety of subjects. However, this is not always the case, especially when they're traveling. And when it is clear that Anne Walker is fascinated by the things that she's seeing and experiencing, then she tends to go on and on and on and on. And really, in several places, her journal entries are vastly larger than the corresponding Lister entries. In those places and elsewhere, Anne Walker's journal clearly shows that she was a woman of education, culture, and curiosity. I think people sometimes have this idea that, well, Anne Lister is this larger than life person, and compared to her, Anne Walker is this, sort of little mouse. It's really not true. She clearly enjoys their travels. She engages with everything she sees and with everyone she meets. She visits booksellers, buys a bunch of books, quite a lot of them in French, and reads them. She engages with the works of art, discusses them, buys art prints, is fascinated by the various stories that she hears from the locals, by the way that they dress, by the way that they talk, by what they eat. In fact, in some of the details, when we compare the diaries, for example, the names of the places or the names of the artists that they encounter, quite a few times, Miss Walker actually gets their names exactly right, when Miss Lister does not. So, good on ya, Miss Walker. On the other hand, this usual brevity in her journal is often quietly affecting. For example, she'll simply say something like, I knitted a blanket for Auntie, and she means Miss Aunt Anne Lister. So she's at Shibden, and she's now a member of that family, and that's her auntie. I mean, there's Aunt Anne Walker, but this is Auntie, and this little word is just immensely affecting. And that the mere fact that she simply says, I was knitting her a blanket, is also quite endearing. She can, however, also be very forceful, which we can see from the bits of her diary that deal with the dealings with her tenants. Or in November, perhaps the reason that she took up journaling in November was that there was this hunt that was illegally on her land, and she didn't like it. And it is quite clear from her diary that she didn't like it. She was quite forceful about it. And it is not only that her journal gives Anne Walker a voice for the first time, but she also throws another light onto Anne Lister. For example, there are 10 days in July of 1834, which we simply didn't have, which were missing from Anne Lister's life as far as we were concerned, because those pages in her diary were blank. But they're not blank in Anne Walker's journal, and we have them. And in point of fact, one of my favorite ever scenes from Anne Lister's life is precisely this one scene from Anne Walker's journal, where the two of them meet some female peasants somewhere in the Savoy Alps, and they have a little conversation. They compliment each other's dresses and pelisses and so on. And there's this wonderful bit. Diaries had a long conversation with two peasants, told them they were in grand toilette, and one very pretty praised them for not being married. This is like quintessential Anne Lister and quintessential Gentleman Jack. So this is just a wonderful scene. And when we compare scenes, events from their lives together, so sort of intimate scenes, their relationship, for example, this one, Tiff, that they had in August 1834, which stemmed from some sort of stupid miscommunication, which will be a theme in the years together. They really needed some sort of couples therapy. We have this, again, quietly affecting way that Anne Walker talks about it. So, Dearest never spoke all time of dressing, scarcely, wanted to go out without me, waited for me, silent and grave, walked to Colpit. Dearest conversation with me, very kind and too grave to make me happy. Walked home to inn after an hour's absence. Dearest made tea for me, very grave, ended by explanation, all made up, and Dearest quite as fond and kind to me as ever. And it is lovely to see this, and then it is lovely to see the same thing covered by Anne Lister. It's clear that they are talking about the same thing, but there are subtle differences in the way that they approach the whole thing, in the way that they see it. Moving on to the transcription of Anne Walker's journal. Now, this was a team effort by 5 people altogether, which 3 of these groups started transcribing Anne Walker's journal independently, and then we decided to merge forces. And this involved many midnight Zoom sessions, many exasperated sessions poring over Anne Walker's scribblings. I have to say, as an Anne Lister transcriber, this was so much harder. Perhaps it is that I'm just so used to Anne Lister's handwriting by now, and I wasn't used to this kind of handwriting. And perhaps it is that Anne Walker writes about 5 or 6 or 7 different letters in the same way sometimes, but this was pretty hard. And my wife, Ivana Nika, who transcribed with me, and myself started off from black and white photocopy, which we ordered from the West Yorkshire Archives. And you can see from this little snippet what this looks like, and it was a bit of a challenge. And it was only later that we were able to get digital copies, digital scans, and then we spent quite a few nights trying to collate everything together, all of this work by all these different people, and try to figure out which bits on the page were commas or dots, or which were just smudges. Anne Walker's approach to punctuation is, let's say, creative. I have this wonderful picture of her in my head, of her having a big bag full of commas on her shoulder and walking around with it, and every so often grabbing into the bag, taking a bunch of commas and just spreading them over the page willy-nilly with gay abandon, which is what it looks like when you look at where the commas are on the page. But in the end, there were actually just a few words that we could not decipher. And, we let this be a challenge for anyone who watches this and who wants to try their hand. Tell us what you think they are, and let's hope that we get at it. As all transcription, I think always does involve, at least to a certain extent, research or detective work. This one did so quite a lot. making sure that we were reading and interpreting things correctly. We were tracking down places, people, and things that Anna then interacted with. In our published transcriptions on our project page, we include place names which we should track down, because in quite a lot of cases, those places that we visited either no longer exist. They were like a solitary poll station, and now it's just not there. Or they are now called something else, or they just completely misheard the names and miswrote them, and we had engaged in quite a lot of detective work to find out where those places are. And we did that so that you could follow them on the map as well. Engaging with all this, with all these people and places and things that they did, made for us, I'm speaking for myself, but I think that goes for everyone who work on transcription. It made every moment in the diaries come alive again. And now I'll be handing you over to Louise, and she will tell you a bit more about Anne Walker in the Diaries.
Thanks, Doriana. So the Anne Walker in the Diaries project, or AWID, as we like to call it, it was it's one of those slow cooking, long burner projects. That's it was the first thing that I started working on when I joined. I think it was pretty much just Diane and Alexa way back when. It was what I started working on. It's kind of what I go back to in between working on other projects like blogs and transcriptions. And what it is, we are trying to find every mention of relating to Anne Walker in Anne Lister's diaries. So whether it's Anne Walker herself or family, friends, properties, etc., we are looking for those references in the Anne Lister diaries. So we've got a crack team of diary transcribers and also blog hunters. So the people who were not transcribers were a team of people who were searching the internet for blogs where people have done their own transcriptions of the diaries and kind of looking for references to Anne Walker that we perhaps didn't know about because the transcribers on our team had not done those pages themselves. So far, we think we're getting there. We've got 279 entries from the years 1809 to 1831. And 2,150 from 1832 to 1840. We still have a few gaps that we're plugging, but we kind of fairly confident that we've got a really good coverage there. So now we're kind of in the process of checking the data, cleaning up the data, cross-checking references, and adding links to blogs, to West Yorkshire Archive Service, adding references to the secondary sources like the books by Anne Chomer and Helena Whitbread, Jill Eddington, where we've got those so that when the database goes live, people can look at the primary sources, they can look at the secondary sources and get, just as much information as they can. I would welcome any help with this process of tidying up and cross-checking. So if you have an obsession with tiny details and accuracy, please get in touch and I can give you something that will test your obsession skills. So the next slide just has a couple of, this was the first entry that we have, the earliest entry that we have so far. And in fact, it was actually Layla that found this one from January 1809, where Anne Lister and her aunt are walking to Crow Nest. And I believe that Miss B and her brother were guests at Crow Nest. I can't remember the context, but yes, that's our first mention of Crow Nest there. And then on the next slide, this actually kind of leads really nicely onto the next project that I'm going to talk about. And this actually, this date, this is taken from the 29th of October, 1834, forgot to put the date on the slide. So this just went live with the diary comparison page that went live this morning. So on the 29th of October, 1834, Anne Lister was reading over Anne Walker as she was working on copying her father's will. And it's interesting to note there that the copying that Anne Walker was doing, she already had 65 foolscap pages of text, which is a lot. So I thought it was quite nice to sort of bookend that part of what I'm talking about with this nice segue into John Walker's will, which is what Anne was copying. She had 65 pages of foolscap. We had 31 pages of PDF, which were scanned photocopies of impenetrable 19th century legalese. It was essentially one paragraph over 31 pages. There's no punctuation at all. There may have been one comma, unlike Anne Walker, one comma. Random capitalization, no paragraphs, nothing. It was just a wall of text that was pretty hard to read. Many first-time transcribers, me included, but a few of us did a paleography workshop with West Yorkshire Archive Service, which was fantastic. And then we were kind of, ready to rock and roll. We set up a system using Google Drive, which meant that everyone sort of had access to the documents. We set up a system where we would transcribe, a second person would check the transcriptions, the first person would then go back and review any comments, and then the finished pages were moved into a new folder. And then once we had all the pages done, checked, reviewed, finalized, we kind of put them all back together again and spat out a new version of the will that was legible in as much as you could read the text, but impenetrable language. So there are obviously several references to Anne Walker in the will, but as you can see here, to the use of the first son of the body of my said daughter Anne lawfully to be begotten, and the heirs male of the body of such first son lawfully issuing, and for default of such issue to the use of the second heirs fourth, fifth, sixth. This fills 31 pages, right? And it's kind of it was slightly profound. It was kind of profound experience to read these references that John Walker is making to his assumed future for Anne, with a husband and all these children that will have children, and the Crow Nest estate will just get passed on through time, because of course we know there is no husband and there are no children. This second section here, where he's talking about paying interest and dividends unto my said daughter Anne during her life for her own sole, separate and peculiar use and benefit, exclusive of any husband, and without being liable to his control, debts or engagements. So I thought it was also interesting that even though he's kind of assuming this future for her that involves a husband, it's Anne's inheritance. It's exclusive of her husband, and it's not going to come under his control. So that's kind of, for me, it was my first experience of transcribing. The first page that I did, I felt like it took me a lifetime. But I got some really good feedback from an old hand at 19th century wills, and then after that I was hooked, and I want to do more. so that's what I've got to say on John Walker's will, and I'm gonna pass you on to Deb, who is going to talk about the blogs.
Hi, I'm Deb Wilson, and I'm going to talk about Anne's Associate blogs. Carolyn Maillard and I are the organizers of the researchers, and we're all volunteers, and we're doing a deep dive into the people in Anne Walker's life. Currently, we have 10 researchers. So far, we've published, we have a slide here. So far, we've published Lydia Fenton, John Reimer, Delia Priestley Edwards, Samuel Washington, and Delia Rawson. And we have more coming up. Who doesn't want to know what happened to Catherine Rawson? And what else can we learn about Elizabeth and George Sutherland? So we have a lot more in store. So why was I drawn to this research? I live in the United States, and in my country, the highest military award given to for valor is called the Medal of Honor. And I heard a mother speak about the Medal of Honor and her son, a posthumous recipient of it. And she said, the only thing worse than dying is being forgotten. And I see our blogs as a way of remembering these people, just as we all learned and remember Anne Walker and Anne Lister from Gentleman Jack, as well as the books. Our associate blogs do the same. Through them, these people from the past will never be forgotten. So I've been researching with Diane in the group for 6 months. I had just started my retirement, and this journey couldn't have come along at a better time. Diane put out a call for researchers, and I thought about it. I didn't know if I could do it, so I decided I'd try. If I wasn't good at it, I'd never do it again. But to my surprise, I loved it. And for me, it's like solving a mystery. So in the last 6 months, I've learned some things. First and foremost is to keep my personal opinions, theories, and judgments out of it, to follow the research. Always try to find primary sources, which is not always easy when you're dealing with the 1800s. And know that research continues, that whether it's yours or someone else's, we are all looking for the facts, so it's not a competition. And I've learned that people are really eager to help you as you start on this path. So I want to give you a few anecdotes from some of the posts that have already gone up. Samuel Washington, Susanna, who we saw get married in Gentleman Jack, she never married, and she passed away at the age of 21. Sam and Hannah lost a child at 22 months. They ended up having, Hannah then died after Susanna, and Sam remarried, and he left behind 7 daughters. In Sam's will, I found that Evan Charles Sutherland Walker gave him a silver tea set as a thank you for his years of service to the Walker family. And he instructed that it not be split up, that it be kept together with one of his daughters, and the daughters had to decide which one. So it does make you wonder, where is that tea set today? Delia Rawson, as I like to say, Delia Fuller Lips Rawson, with the help of several churches and an Anglican priest, I was able to find Delia's final resting place with her parents. The church warden there took photos for me, which just enhanced my blog. Of the 3 people I've researched and published, Delia was the only one who left money to her servants. Also in her will, she requested to be buried, with her parents. And that was about 300 miles from where she died. But she also said, if it's too inconvenient, then you can bury me with my sister, who was much closer. So I was pleased in reading it that her executors did put her on. Most likely it was 300 miles, so it was most likely train and then a cart to the cemetery. And lastly is Lydia, my first blog. We know that she was a childhood friend of Anne Walker's. Lydia married a reverend, had 2 stillborn births, became a widow early. We know in 1851, Lydia, the census shows us that Lydia is living with Anne Walker at Cliff Hill. And in my research, going through different documents at West Yorkshire Archive, I came across a conveyance of pews between Lydia and her sister Mary. Lydia signed and dated that document in 1852, and she was at Cliff Hill. So we now know she was at least there in 1852. I hope as research continues, we find out she was there to be with Ann Walker when she passed, but only research is going to tell us that. So you can read our blogs at insearchofannwalker.com, and we're looking for more volunteers to join us as we research more people in Ann's life. I felt a little intimidated at first, but don't feel intimidated. And if you're shy, come anyway. If you are curious, if you like to solve a mystery, like communicating with people from all over the globe, then join us. It's fun, and you meet the kindest people willing to help in your research. So for more information, just email us at insearchofannwalker@gmail.com. Thanks for your time. And now, Lila.
Yeah, so my name's Lila, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the different transcription projects that we're working on at the moment. So we are looking, for example, at letters. We're looking at Ann Walker's letters that she wrote to Elizabeth. We also have some of Elizabeth Sutherland's letters. We're looking at some of George Mackay Sutherland's letters. And just as an aside, in terms of handwriting, his handwriting is horrible. I mean, Ann Walker's can be challenging, and I would say the letters are usually a little bit better. She writes a bit more legible in the letters, but then a lot of them are crossed. So that has its own challenge sometimes. But yeah, compared to Sutherland's, it's nothing. So if anyone wants like an extra challenge, read some of his letters. A lot of them are also drafts, so that makes it quite difficult sometimes to read. Then we're also looking at letters from Parker or from Musgrave. So we're looking at a lot of people that cross paths with Ann Walker. We're looking at accounts and wills. So like John Walker's will, for example, we have Ann Walker's will, George Mackay Sutherland's will. And we're also looking at diaries that other people wrote. So we have Christopher Rawson's diary, for example, or Caroline Wyville Walker, who was a relative of Walker. She wrote the diary of Ann Walker. And she wrote a diary, and she mentions the Cronest family every now and then. Oh, it's not going to be for a while, Steph. Yeah, thanks. I'll signal you. So anyways, yeah, we're looking at all of these documents because they can provide us with information that you might not necessarily find anywhere else. Like with the accounts, you often find a date of a certain payment, for example, and based on that, we might be able to infer where Ann Walker might have been staying. And the documents also give us a different perspective, especially a different perspective on Ann Walker, but also her perspective, like the way she writes in her letters, in addition to Ann Lister's diary, for example, which is a great source. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the letters now, because that's what I was working on together with Kirsten. We were looking at letters that Ann Walker wrote to Elizabeth between 1834 and 1835. And we picked those years because that's also the time that the diary, Ann Walker's diary, covers. And the letters cover a lot of different topics. So some were still written in the honeymoon phase, like the travel period. And then others were written from Shipton, and those had a lot of business in them. So there's a lot of business discussion that's going on between Ann Walker and Elizabeth about the tenants, or if something happened on the property. A big topic is also the property division that occurred during that time. So Elizabeth and Anne were splitting the property. And while that is important, and it took up a lot of paper and time, for me, it's not necessarily where you see Ann Walker best, or where you really get a sense of who she is. Because if you're familiar with Ann Walker's voice and you're familiar with Ann Lister's voice, you can sometimes hear in the business bits Ann Lister's draft. So what I really like, and I think it's also in kind of line with In Search of Ann Walker, is the ends of the letters. Once you get to the end, so that once the business is out of the way, she starts writing more about what's going on in Halifax. She starts writing about her aunt, or she writes about the nephews and nieces. She also sometimes refers to like the Lister family. And I think that's usually where you can hear Ann Walker. You can hear her opinions and the relationship she had with her family. So here I have a couple of examples that I want to show, just because these are the ones I really like and I want to share. So one is from a letter that Anne Walker wrote to Elizabeth when she just got to Paris. So they just crossed the channel. She arrives in Paris, and she first in the letter again writes about the Canterbury Cathedral. And those who read the diary know she spends pages on that cathedral. So she again mentions that and spends like half a page on that again. But then she has this bit, and here you can put up the slide, where she writes about the crossing the channel on the ship. And she writes, "Miss Lister has quite recovered her bilious attack. She suffered much in crossing the water, which I think was very serviceable. I was not at all sick," and the I is underlined. And she also mentions that in her diary. So it's clear that she was so proud that she didn't get sick on that boat while Miss Lister was puking her guts out. And I love this little competitive side of Anne Walker. You can also see it in the diary when she talks about the playing backgammon and winning against Anne Lister, and she just says completely beat her. And I think it's a bit of a side that we don't necessarily see in the diary always, in Anne Lister's diary, but in Anne Walker's writing, it comes through. And another insight we get is, like I said, into the family and the relationship she has with Elizabeth Sutherland's children, for example. Can you wait? Well, it doesn't matter. So the children, she usually refers to them as your dear little pets. So a letter would often end with Anne Walker signing off with the family, so the Lister family, begs their compliments. Miss Lister sends her kind regards. And then Anne Walker would send her love to Elizabeth and Captain Sutherland and all your dear little pets. And during those months that I was reading, the Sutherlands had 4 pets. So the eldest would be Mary, little Mary, and Anne Walker would often write about her in terms of like my own dear little Mary, my dear little Mary. Little Mary also wrote letters to Anne Walker, and Anne Walker promises to respond to these letters. So it's clear that there's a closer bond there with little Mary. And she's also the one that visits Anne Lister and Anne Walker in 1837. And then Sackville and Elizabeth, the middle children, they're not mentioned. I mean, they're always mentioned. She always goes through all of the children in order, but there's not a whole lot of detail we get there. Sackville is often called Sack. Elizabeth is sometimes called Little Fussy. And then John is the newborn at that point. So he's born in 1834, and he's just called Baby. So both Anne and Elizabeth, they just refer to him as Baby, not by name. And we actually know quite a bit about Baby. We know, for example, he got vaccinated a couple of times. So Anne would write, I hope Baby bore its vaccination well and didn't catch a cold. So the Sutherlands were pro-vaccination. And then something that I love is the quote up here. There's an ongoing discussion between Elizabeth and Anne Walker about Jons Hair, which makes me think he might have had red hair. So Anne Walker writes to Elizabeth. She responds to something she says, and she writes, "I should have been glad if his hair had been any other color, but never mind. We shall not like him a bit the less for that." And she continues in that letter writing, maybe just don't tell anyone. And by the time people come around and see him, the hair color might have changed. And especially if she uses some kind of ointment or like a hair oil to make the hair darker. And in another letter, so it's really an ongoing thing, she writes, "I'm glad Baby cut his hair, or you cut Baby's hair, so maybe it'll grow back darker." And for me, it's just funny because it's clear that Elizabeth seems to have some kind of issue with the hair color of her child. And Anne Walker's like, it'll be fine. It'll be darker, never mind, we still love him. So yeah, I think all of these documents, they can provide us with really important information with dates and all of that, but you get these little nuggets that show us the personal life that was going on with like Elizabeth and Anne. Like Elizabeth, for example, had a shower bath, and Anne Walker says, "Oh, I'm glad you enjoy your shower bath. I might get one as well," but then she doesn't at the end. So yeah, the documents are really great. If anyone wants to work on these, they're awesome. And yeah, back to Diane.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the other things that we're doing. So as you can see here on this slide, there's a whole list of places that we've either visited or going to visit soon, or online or in person. We continue our archive research. We'll go anywhere and look anywhere to find even the slightest little bit of reference to Anne, because actually what we're trying to do is just fill in all those blanks in her life. So we know a lot during the period that Anne Lister, she was with Anne Lister, and not so much beforehand and not so much afterwards. And what our plan in search of Anne Walker is literally what our project name is that we're going to search for Anne Walker for as much information as that we can absolutely find about her. The other things that we're also doing are our research blogs. So as you can see, it's quite small there, so I do apologise. We basically, we invite people, if you've got a particular interest of a subject related to Anne Walker that makes you want to know more and research around and through it, let us know. We'll work with you on it. You can write it up, and we'll put it up on our blog, on our website, sorry, in a form of a blog. I mean, the kind of things we've done something on Anne's education, we've done something on Rawson's Bank. These have all been written by other people, and essentially, you know, if you've got an interesting idea for a research blog around something even remotely related to Anne Walker, please let us know. And lastly, I just want to talk about the other really important side of what we do In Search of Anne Walker. So Anne's legacy is part of what we're doing to make her not be a footnote anymore. Most of you may be aware that there's a brass plaque inside the St Matthew's Tower, which is a memorial to Anne Walker and her nephews, and that was commissioned by her only remaining nephew and her heir, Evan Charles Sutherland Walker, in the early 1860s. Now, previously, there was some money raised for the memorial, and that's held by the Friends of Friendless Churches, who are responsible for the tower. And that's because we are going to restore the brass plaque in the St Matthew's Tower. If you haven't seen it, it's quite faded. Now, apparently, there is only one brass plaque restorer in the UK, and so we are waiting on that to be done. And of course, the pandemic has slowed things down somewhat, but that's part of the legacy of Anne Walker. The ultimate aim, however, is to restore the St Matthew's Tower itself, to make it safe and publicly accessible, and that tower itself will become the memorial to Anne, which we think is a really fitting thing for her. She spent a lot of time at St Matthew's Church. So we also get a lot of people asking us about a gravestone. I just wanted to address this quickly for Anne, but I just want to mention that Lightcliffe Churchyard, that part of Lightcliffe Churchyard that Anne is buried in, is actually a Church of England closed churchyard, which means that nothing new can legally be added to it. So it means a gravestone, unfortunately, isn't possible. The temporary marker that everybody sees in pictures that is there merely there to indicate to people the approximate location of the vault where Anne is buried with her aunts Anne and Mary, so that people can pay their respects. The other part of the legacy that we're working on, when Anne died in 1854, in her will, which was written in 1841, she left a legacy, £10 at Christmas time for the poor of Lightcliffe. And we decided it was a fitting legacy to continue the modern day equivalent of that in her and her family's name. Now, Anne actually added this to her will because her uncle, William Walker, who died in 1809, also had it in his will. But unfortunately, for some reason, it wasn't legally able to be carried out. So Anne's legacy was paid out from the 1860s, and we found evidence just recently that it was still being paid out in about 1973 is when it finished, when it was no longer viable, when the amount that was put aside for it had kind of run out. We intend to fundraise every year for a local Lightcliffe food bank, which was the closest equivalence that we could do. We started this last year and we raised £1,185, which is about $1,630. Now, we raised this for the Wyke Food Bank. That's only about 1.5 miles from Cliff Hill, which was the place that Anne was living before she died. Now, amazingly, the figure that we raised, the 1,185, is very close to what £10 in 1854 would be today. That's about 1,137. So that was just an amazing thing. A little slight coincidence, but I like those little details. This year, we're going to be fundraising for Brighouse Food Bank, and we're going to launch this in November. So please look out for it on social media and give if you feel you can. Now, there is one other exciting legacy piece that we're still working on, which we hope to announce very soon, and it'll all be about recognising Anne and her relationship with Anne Lister. Can't say too much at the moment, but please keep your eyes peeled on our social media for updates, because coming soon will be something I think will be pretty amazing. Now, before I finish, I just want to say there was 5 of us here today representing all the contributors, but I just want to give a list of names of the people that have been involved, because without them, we wouldn't be here today. So I want to thank everybody that's been involved. So I want to thank Steve, Sophie, Louise, Alex, Steph, Kirsten, Layla, Hayley, Mandy, Ivana, Frankie, Sam, Emmy, Martina, Bethany, Heather, Doriana, Alexa, Tiffany, Iona, Chloe, Noelle, Ilva, Helen C, Pascal, Deb, Charlotte, Jessica, Ari, Karen T, Karen R, Ashley, Caroline, Bree, Martin, Leitner, Ash M, Renora, Sean, and Jen. And I want to say thank you so much for all of you for being involved. There is always lots of opportunities to contribute to our project. If you'd like to be part of this list, please let us know what you're interested in. You can contact us on insearchofanwalker@gmail.com. We have a Discord that we invite people to. You come along, you chat to people, you see what you want to be involved in. We just ask for enthusiasm and just a real interest in getting Anne Walker out there for everybody to learn more about. And so thank you very much for listening to us, and I think we've back to Steph.
Yes, we do have time for some Q&A, so I'm trying to stay out of my shifting daylight from the window here. That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I think everybody can tell from just the tidbits that you've shared with us here today that there is plenty for people to get involved with if they're interested. I know that we did have some questions, and I suspect this first one is going to be for Doriana, who is herself proficient in a few languages. One of the questions was, did Anne Walker write in other languages in her journal? And if so, could you give us an idea of how proficient she was with those?
Well, not as such. I mean, if by writing in other languages we mean at least 4 phrases or sentences or paragraphs, she obviously writes the names of places and that they go to, or names of people that they meet. And here and there, she uses a local French word for things. For example, she says chalet for the mountain huts that they visit. Poulet, she eats her weight in poulets throughout the trip. But you can't really say that she writes in French, not even in the sort of franglais that Anne Lister sometimes employs. It's just basically individual words. But when she does use the individual words and the place names and so on, she's pretty good. Like I said, often she gets it right where Lister doesn't, because I think Anne Lister sort of thinks, yeah, I know it. I hear it and I know how to spell it. And then she spells God knows what, and then when 200 years later you research it, and you're like, it took me 3 hours to get it. Whereas Anne Walker, she probably goes and looks at her guidebook. This is how it's written, and she writes it, and it's correct.
All right. We also had a question for Louise about the arrangement in John Walker's will, and if that was something that was unusual for the time. Jane commented that, there's a line in the show where the Rossens seem to think differently about leaving the inheritance to women. Oh, you're muted, Louise.
Sorry. It certainly doesn't go straight to Anne and Elizabeth. It's so convoluted. I've read the whole thing and I still couldn't quite tell you how it goes. There is the reason that we were doing it, which I forgot to mention, was we were doing it with friends of Old St Matthews and Lightcliffe Churchyard, and they have a post on their web page about, they wanted to know everything that the entirety of John Walker's estate and kind of how it was divvied up. But yeah, it essentially, and Diane, please correct me if I'm going completely off piece here. It basically essentially went to John first, right? And then to Anne, John and any of his heirs, and then it would be Anne and Elizabeth. But there were also there were Edwardses, there were Rawsons, there were cousins everywhere. It's really complicated, is the short answer.
I have another question. I'm not sure, maybe Diane wants to take this one. But regarding the memorial piece, how have you navigated some of the concerns about restoration of the plaque, or, you know, kind of who has authority there? I know you mentioned the struggle of just finding somebody who could do that kind of restoration work, but have you had any challenges navigating that to do that?
Sure. So Friends of Friendly Churches, they have had a brass plaque restorer, as I said, probably the only one in the UK. He's come out, he's had a look at it, and we're waiting on his final say-so on whether or not it can be properly restored in a proper way. And once we get that, we'll know whether or not the memorial plaque will be able to be restored in the way that we'd like it to be. As I said, as the follow-up to that, the ultimate aim is for the tower to be turned into the memorial. So there's opportunity there for things about Anne's life to be in there. There's opportunity for all kinds of things to be put inside the tower if for whatever reason the plaque can't be restored. But I haven't actually heard anything of that. I know that Alexa is in the chat. She might want to put a little bit something else if she knows a little bit more. She wasn't able to be here today, but that's as far as we are at the moment. So there might be some challenges with it, but regardless, there's a plan B, or actually an ultimate plan, which is to turn the entire tower into the memorial for Anne.
Great. I think we're just coming up against our time here, but I wanted to make sure that we get this last slide up one more time for everybody. As you can see, that there is a plethora of information to dive into if you're interested in getting involved, or just going and reading all of the things on insearchofannewalker.com for more. So you can reach out to them at any of the methods provided here, or follow up with that link. And I want to thank our panelists again for being here and sharing a glimpse at all of the work that's going on over at In Search of Anne Walker. And thank you to our audience for questions and being here for this last session of the day. This does conclude day 2 of the summit. But if you would like to wind down and have a little chat, the water closet will be open for a little while yet, so you can meet up there for some continued conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.